Hi there. I'm author Shannon Reber, and this is Genre's Bookshop podcast, finally back in business. And my first interview of the new season is Mary Ellen Humphrey. Sorry. For some reason, I
Okay.
was trying to call you Mary Ellen Roth. I don't know why. But
My
Mary
alter
Ellen
ego.
Humphrey. Yeah, yes, exactly. And she is one of the authors who sells her books in the shop. So, and I now have a visitor. Mary
Yeah.
Ellen, would you give us a little introduction?
Yes. Well, let me first of all thank you, Shannon, for talking with me today. I've always loved to talk about writing, the writing process, and how people can write their books and their stories and why we write. And, there's as many reasons as there are writers, I think, for writing stories. And so my stories, I've been writing for decades, but most of my books that I write have a personal reason for writing them. They may be a memoir of some sort or an experience or something that tickles my fancy. I want to explore an idea, political kind of what if sort of things. Some of my books tend to be like that. And every year, as you know, I do this thing called NaNoWriMo. So
Yes.
this was I think it was my 16th year doing it.
Very
And
nice.
and I always reach the 50,000 words. I never go much over it, but I always reach it. And so this year I was kind of thinking, well, it's getting kind of boring. I know I'm going to reach it. I should set it higher. So I set a goal of 75,000, but I still only did 50. But it did take away the boringness I'm going to do it. It's something that I look at as a writing exercise in the fall to jumpstart my winter writing because I tend to take summers off. I tend to go outdoors and work in the garden or whatever I feel like doing. I like sunshine. I like being outside. But in the wintertime, I get that seasonal affect thing going on where it's dark
Ah,
all the
yes.
time and I get kind
Yes,
of depressed.
yes.
So that's when I delve into my writing and really it helps not only to pass the time, but it makes it much more interesting for me.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So this book here that I think we're talking about, the Angels, ETs, Miracles and Messages, is my
Yes.
most recently published book, I think. I did this about, I think it was in February or March of this year. And it kind of came to me as a post nano idea of putting together, I forget what triggered it, but something unusual happened. And I started thinking about, because I'm a journaler, I've journaled for decades, so I have written down all these little things that happen over the years. And I thought, I've had some unusual experiences. I wouldn't put them in the bizarre way out there things, but just those odd things that, we kind of note, but we don't.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I thought, I'm going to put those in, see how many I have, and put them into a book, mostly to share with family and friends, because, you don't necessarily talk about encounters with an ET or, ghost stories and have everybody look at you like, oh my gosh, these must be from Mars. But uh, I'm at
Well,
the
you
age
you would
now.
be an ET, so there you go.
Yeah, well, I'm of the age now where I really don't care so much what everybody thinks, and I'm kind of I wanted it to be an opportunity to share stories, and it started back when I was in the mid 1990s. I served in the New Hampshire legislature. It's a fluky story, and I wrote a book about that, of course. But um, I was kind of this reluctant legislator. And just before I started my term, I had written a story. It was called The Warning. And the story was for a magazine called Fate Magazine. And I was trying to give myself writing exercises. So I was going to different magazines. And back then, they were physical magazines who had guidelines for submissions. And so I was looking at all these various guidelines for submissions. And I found this one, Fate Magazine, that I had never seen the magazine, which is probably not wise, but I did it. And so I saw this call for stories of true experiences, 200 words or less. Well, in my kind of newness to all this. I thought it meant exactly 200 words. So I spent like 2 weeks writing this little story to get exactly 200 words, which was a great exercise because I had to
Yeah,
take out all the stuff that wasn't important, had to make sure I included that made sense, followed the logic.
right.
And so I really labored over it. I sent it off a couple years before this all happened. And just before I was elected, I got a letter saying they had selected my story to be included. It was my first published in a magazine, national magazine story. And so I was excited about that. I got a check for $25, which was pretty good
Oh,
back
that
then.
is good.
Yeah,
Yes.
and my first paid gig. And so but then something happened. So it came out just before I was elected, and I got a call from this author who is named John Renner, who has written several books called Angel books, stories about angels.
Okay.
And he said, "Can I interview you about your story?" And I was very, very shy back then. So I was like, I guess so, And but I said, I never used, never say this was an angel. I never said that. I just said it was a warning. He
Okay.
said, I know that's what intrigues me about your story. So I explained the
Oh.
story to him. And the story about the story is more amazing than the story. And so what happened is after we talked for, I don't know, half hour or so, he said, I'd like to ask if you would be willing to accompany me to be on the Phil Donahue show because he was going to be on in like 2 weeks. And I said, "Oh my God, there's no way I could never do that. First of all, I'm afraid to travel to New York City. I guess that's where it was. And secondly, to be on TV, are you kidding?" And of course, this was someone newly elected to the legislature. I didn't know what I
Right,
was
right,
getting
right.
in for. But anyway, I had to decline. Today, of course, I would be, how quick can I get there? But
Oh,
back
yeah,
then,
yeah.
I was very shy. So he was disappointed and he said, "Well, I'm going to be on a Kentucky radio show Sunday. Can I call you on air and talk to you about your story?" And I said, "Well, I might be able to do that." So Sunday came. I was a nervous wreck. I went upstairs in the closet, closed the door, took the phone, and did the interview. And he asked me to recount my story. So
Okay.
I told the story, and then it was over, and he hung up, and I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it. So then a week or two later, I get a phone call from this company called Cascom, Cascom Productions. They were making a two-part series for the Learning Channel called Angel Stories. And they
Ah,
wanted my permission to use my voice recorded on the radio to reenact my story as part of their two-part series.
okay.
Wow, I was like, "Oh my goodness, all this from this little story." So, of course, I said yes. I didn't have to do anything, so it was easy to say yes to that.
Heck yeah.
But in their promotion, they sent press releases. All of this was new to me back then. They sent press releases to all the newspapers in New Hampshire. And so there was
Oh.
published "Legislator Touched by an Angel."
Oh.
Just before, just as I'm starting out in this world of politics, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I can't show my face there." But what actually happened is all of these older people, because the New Hampshire legislature is 400 people, so a lot of them are retired people,
Okay.
and a lot of them wanted to talk to me about their stories. So I would
Oh.
go down to the cafeteria in the basement of the LOB, and I would sit with these folks, these older folks who told me their wonderful stories about when their mom passed and how she sent a message, or when their dad left them this, or all these really, really interesting stories.
Yeah.
So when I put this book together, that was my hope, that it would be a, um, a way to jumpstart other people sharing their stories. And I say very clearly, because I'm quoted in the newspaper as saying, "I have no explanation. I'm not offering that it's, anything at all. I'm only telling you what I experienced." And and I think that's the honest way to look at it, because I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if my brain has the ability to imagine things that feel real and I hallucinate. Who knows? I mean, there could be all kinds of explanations. But in each of the cases that I document in this book, they really happened. And I did share them at the time with close friends.
Okay.
Um, the ET, there is one ET experience, which is kind of fun because back in the in the 60s. I'm in my 70s. So, and excuse me, I grew up in the state of Maine. And, this is the time frame of Barney and Betty Hill and all of the crazy UFO stuff going on. But I
Okay.
was a little kid. I didn't really know much about any of that. And so we had our UFO experience, and I never shared it with anybody until this book. So I had gone with my son a couple years ago. He lives in Maryland. I had gone with him. He invited me to go to the annual UFO conference, which I thought I expected people dressed in UFO, really wacky people, but it wasn't. It was serious people in suits and dressed up and talking about serious matters. And that kind of inspired me to share the story because
Yeah,
I thought, well, maybe I won't be viewed as a total kook after all. But
right,
if I am,
exactly.
it's okay. So that's the gist of it.
That is very cool.
Mhm.
So, your ET story, you did tell your grandma about this when you were a
I
kid, though,
did,
right?
yes, at the
Yes.
time that it
Okay.
happened.
And she is actually the reason that you thought it would be bad to tell people. Is that correct?
Yeah, she said, if you ever tell anyone, they'll put you in the nut house. I didn't know at that time, I was 11 or 12 years old. I
Mm.
wasn't sure what the nut house was, but it didn't sound like a place I wanted to be.
Right, exactly.
And besides, I thought my grandmother was the wisest person in the world. That's why I talked to
Of
her about it.
course. Yes,
And
yes,
if she
yes.
said, don't tell anyone, I took that seriously. And for many, many years, I never did tell anybody. My younger brother, who's still alive, my older brother has passed away, but my younger brother remembers it very vividly.
Okay.
We did discuss it amongst ourselves once we grew up and got older. And it was interesting because I said to him when he brought it up one time, I said, here's a piece of paper. You go in this room and draw what you saw, and I'll go in this room and draw what I saw, and let's see how close it looks.
Okay.
And it was the same. Um, I had it's burned into my brain. So even though it was
Oh, okay.
60 years ago or more, I still remember it like yesterday.
Right.
And it was bizarre. I have to say, I felt that even then, as frightened as I felt there was a sense of humor about this creature, whatever
Okay.
it was, that he was laughing at me, at us kids who were scared, know, to death and running down the road screaming. I think it humored him somehow. The things that he did during the about 2 week period that he was around us, I feel
Okay.
like he was deliberately trying to spook us. Maybe that
Oh,
was a
okay.
test that they do. Let's see how scared we can make little kids and what do they do? And will the grown-ups believe them or whatever? Of course they don't. But
Of course,
my
the
grandmother
adults
did
never do.
because, yeah, my grandmother talked to each of us separately because we didn't talk about it amongst ourselves at first.
Mm.
And we each experienced it except my dad. He slept through the whole thing each time. But we
That's
all
pretty funny,
experienced
actually.
it. Yeah, it is. Well, he worked really hard, and I think he slept soundly. But at any rate, we individually told her our story. And when I was done telling her my story, she said, now I've spoken to your brother, your two brothers, and your mother, and they've all told me the same thing. And I said, really? And that's when I talked to my brother. I said, you heard
Okay.
the noise? Well, I knew because we crawled in the closet and found the little guy. But before that, I didn't know they were hearing the same things and seeing the same things I was seeing.
Okay.
And I was a insomniac as a child. I didn't sleep very much. It was night was kind of a hard time for me. So a lot of times
Oh,
I had a little diary starting from like 5 years old. I would go over to this small window at the end of my room because we had this cape where there was windows on the slanted walls and really
right,
small
right.
little house. And I'd go over and I'd sit in that window, and the moon, when it was full, was bright enough that I could just barely write in my
Okay.
journal. And I would write, Dear Diary, this is what I did today. And then, of course, as I got older, I would write more stuff, more important stuff than I played with my dolls or whatever. So it was ingrained in me from very young that I wanted to express and my voice would be my words.
Right,
They would be
right.
written words more than perhaps my actual voice. So anyway, I didn't fall asleep as quickly as everyone else in the house. I usually heard people. My dad snored loudly. I hear him. My older brother walked in his sleep, and sometimes
Oh,
he'd walk
really?
in my room. Yeah,
Oh,
and I'd
okay.
see him. And one time he walked in my room, and he fell over my feet on the bottom of my bed. He just fell over. And
Oh.
I went, Danny, Danny, I hollered, and he said, where am I? I guess you're not supposed to wake up sleepwalkers. So
Yeah, I've heard that.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, but I did. And I said, get in your own bed. Go on. So, yeah. So anyway, I have all of my experiences, even that one I have to say, are positives in my life. They're not negatives. I wasn't spooked. I don't think of ghosts and spirits in a negative way.
Okay.
Someone told me that paranormal has a negative connotation to it.
I
In my
actually
mind,
honestly do not believe that.
I don't think so. I think it means extra normal, not
Yeah.
normal,
Right.
something out
Exactly.
of the normal activity that we can't
Exactly.
explain. But there's a lot of things we couldn't explain years ago that we can now. And it could be that 100 years from now, these kind of things will be explainable, right?
Exactly.
We just don't
Exactly.
know what it is. Maybe our brains haven't evolved enough to detect what it is. I don't know. But but in every case, for me, there was some comfort from it. It was something positive. It wasn't negative. It wasn't frightening. I mean, the little guy in the closet scared me. I won't say it didn't, but as I say, there was this sense of humor that I got. I didn't
Okay.
feel threatened in the sense that I was in danger. I
Okay.
felt startled. I felt shocked.
Right.
When we ran away, my brother and I were together. We both saw it. So that's the other thing that's unusual. We did this together. It wasn't one person. And we ran down the road. I was maybe 10 or 11 or 12, and he's a year younger. So we ran as fast as we could until we ran out of breath and fell in the ditch. Now, this is rural Maine. Fell in the ditch laughing, rolling and laughing. We were so shocked and didn't know what to do. And we sat there and we said, did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see it? And then we said, what are we going to do? Well, let's tell our mother. She was gone. But when she got home, we met her at the car and we said, Mom, we got to tell you. And she just said, oh, go play. Didn't believe us. She wasn't going to hear any of it. So then we let it go. And it wasn't until a few weeks later that my grandmother and I had the discussion, and I discovered that
Okay.
the events during the night, which were the UFOs, were actually did happen. And
Okay.
it's interesting. It's interesting the sensation of a being in your room that isn't solid. It's not
Um,
exactly a ghost. I describe it as liquid jello. It's floating and all around, going up
oh.
and down the stairs and all around you, and you know it's a being. You know it's intelligent. You
Okay.
can't quite see it. You know,
Oh.
you can see this glob, but you can't see it,
Okay.
and you have the sensation that it's got doesn't have feet. It has some kind of long things hanging down. I think of jellyfish, kind of
Okay.
almost.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but not exactly. But that's about the closest thing I could say. But it could look at you, had eyes, and it could look at you, and you knew it was looking at you. Like,
Oh.
what do I do now? Is it going to take me away? I don't think it ever did. I don't think I was one of those abductees.
Okay. Well,
But I think I
that's
did
good.
see what people probably call the grays. I think that's what the little creature was.
Okay.
I think I met one in
Oh,
person, up close and
interesting.
personal. Looked him
Okay.
right in the eye and said, "Oh, let me out of here." Yeah,
Well,
yeah. So it was
in
good.
most fantasy books, that which I mean that's the only experience I really have with the paranormal world. But most fantasy books will say specifically that children are more open-minded, so they are more likely to actually see, something out of the ordinary. And it's only as you get older that you get more jaded and less willing to believe these things. So, it
Well,
is from a fantasy book, but I do believe that. I think if anyone is likely to see something, it's going to be a little kid.
yeah, this theories about that we're closer to before. I mean, what were we before? So whatever we were before, we'll probably be after, right? This life is just this in between piece, and then
True.
there's the before and after. So maybe we're closer to the before, and we remember have more insights to it. And we also, if you've ever read about the development of the brain as you mature, when you reach like puberty or something, you lose a whole bunch of brain cells. You grow all these brain cells, but there's a whole bunch that get, I don't know, discarded because you don't need them. And
Oh,
I'm wondering if maybe some of that ability is part of that. But
oh,
I will
okay.
tell you that I think that you can regenerate some of that. In my hiking book that I did, my book called My Mountain Friend,
Hmm.
Wandering and Pondering Mount Major, I talk about that because I hiked to the mountain summit over 1,000 times over a
Right.
period of about 10 years. And it was a very therapeutic experience for me. I was physically fit. So I was getting a lot of fresh air, developing a lot of neurons because I was taking in the beauty of this mountain
Right.
and connecting with it. And I almost felt like I could feel my brain tuning in, to more things. And I describe in there, and I have it in this book as well, what I call my vision quest experience.
Okay.
Um, and it happened towards the end. I think I had maybe a couple more months of hiking after this experience. It was in November, so maybe another year of hiking.
Okay.
And I had the sense that my hiking experience was coming to an end, but that if this one hike was the culmination of all of those hikes, it was worth it. It was such an amazing experience. And connecting with the power of creation, it's the only way I can put it,
Right.
connecting with this kind of like current of energy that sustains all of us,
Hmm.
everything around us, all of creation. And so I'm sure there's other people who have more sophisticated ideas and ways to explain that, but that was my experience. And I did have my last hike there on my 70th birthday. I went up to hike once more, and I had a sense of closure. A lot of interesting things happened, and I put that in my little interesting incidents book because to me, it's just profound.
That's
It's just
amazing.
really neat. Yeah. So I never think of myself as having any kind of unusual life. I think most of us go through our lives and we think I'm just a normal person. I'm working, I have family, I wash dishes, cook dinner, go shopping. I do all these ordinary things. But then when you stop and you think about the extraordinary,
Right.
thing that maybe are only seconds out of your life, but yet they can have a profound positive effect.
That is true.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of saying goodbye to a loved one,
Yeah.
knowing they're okay.
Very true.
Um, you know, and
See,
sometimes it's just reassuring, you know?
I kind of wonder about things like that because I feel like experiences are, what uh changes each person and turns them into who they are. And
Mhm.
two people can experience the same thing and one will come out of it with a positive oh, it changed my life and this happened and I'm a better person because of it. And the person next to them will basically fall down a rabbit hole and they
Yeah.
they will they will sink into the negatives. And
Mm.
it's really interesting how each person has their own way of interpreting um whatever
Yeah.
is happening around them. And
That's a good point, yeah.
yeah.
Because I
So
know my
your
grandmother,
experiences,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, my grandmother was very superstitious, and she didn't like anything that was occult or, witches or spooks or anything like that. She was very, pragmatic about that. But she shared with me when she was older, she lived to be 88, and I used to have her come to my house quite a bit, and, she shared with me because my grandfather passed away at 72, so
Okay.
almost 20 years before she did, or
Okay.
probably 20 years because he was older than her. And as she got older, she said to me one day, kind of embarrassed, and she said, "Well, you're gonna think I'm crazy." We always say that, right? "You're gonna think I'm crazy." But I know it's true, she said. "I was at my kitchen sink, and I was washing the dishes, and I felt Ernest, my grandfather, behind me. And he said to me, as clear as can be, 'Don't be afraid when your time comes.'" And she said it was so comforting.
That gave me
And
goosebumps.
yeah, and I said, Grammy, I believe you. I believe you. And she probably felt comfortable telling me because I had shared
Right.
my things with her.
Right.
And I don't know if she shared it with other people, but I put it in this book. And it's interesting that my cousins um, I have copies of this book. They wanted a copy of it because there are some stories about her in there.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I tend to give her credence because of her skepticism.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you do hear stories about people at the end seeing relatives and hearing their loved ones waiting for them and that sort of thing. And
Right.
and it's easy to think, well, maybe that's our brain preparing us because, how do we deal with death? Death, the annihilation of ourselves, how do we deal
Right.
with that?
Right.
And as you get older, you do think about that more, and none of us has any guarantee how long we're going to be here. So,
True.
um, one thing we do know is we won't be here forever. So that's kind of I think it was Stephen King who said that the reason we read horror is to face our own mortality. Well, no, I'm sure I want to face it his way, but could be. I don't write horror, although I do have some that are a little bit scary. Um, but I do think that these experiences, for me, as I say, are very comforting.
That's
Um,
amazing. Yeah.
yes, and I think they change you if you assimilate it in a positive way.
Right.
You suddenly have a different. I don't know if I want to say clearer, but you have a perspective on
Yes.
life,
Yeah.
and on people that you meet. You don't see people in the same way. It's kind of like when I meet somebody or I know somebody, I feel empathy. I feel, I don't know their life story, but I know they have one. And
Right.
just like I have one,
Right.
they deserve compassion. They deserve encouragement. They deserve, at a girl, at a boy, whatever it is. They deserve to be their best self and to be recognized.
Hmm.
And that's something I'm not sure I would feel if I hadn't tuned into some of this, what I guess you would call paranormal, and
Okay.
accepted that there is some kind of power. It's creative and it's positive, and I believe it has something to do with love. I believe that that's the
Huh.
source of
Okay.
this power, and that maybe this power is what we interpret as love. We
Okay.
give it that name because what do we give names to things? We have this name for God, right? But how do you describe that? What is it? Is it a person, a spirit? So we give names to things that we try to conceive of in our brain.
Right.
And I think love is one of those things that, for me, it's power.
Right.
It's a positive, powerful force that runs through us and through everything. And if you can touch that, and you can touch that in other people,
Yeah.
think about that. That's a really powerful, and it changes your perspective. Even when somebody's not so nice to you, you can sort of have compassion for them. You can say, I don't know why they're saying this mean thing or doing this mean thing. I really feel sorry for them. And I really do feel sorry for them. How can I help? How can I help them be a better version because they are a better version than that? We are better than that,
Right.
right? We're better than the horrible things we see in the world today. If we're not, then it's a pretty sad world
That's
that
true.
we live in. Yeah.
It kind of is a pretty sad world we live in, but
At the
there's a
moment, it certainly
possibility
is.
to raise ourselves above that.
Well, I think that's the quest of humans. Are we going to evolve and become better versions of ourselves, or are we going to be destructive and give in to the baser urges
Right,
that we have?
exactly.
And
Yes.
I'm still hopeful. I know some people have kind of given up, but I'm still hopeful. And I say that my biggest challenge to that belief in my heart is being involved in politics, because
Okay.
I was in both the House and the Senate for a number of years, and I started out very, very positive, believing in people, and at the end, I was feeling kind of discouraged about that
Uh-huh.
view
I
of
understand.
people.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stay in it for too long because I think it would have torn away at my optimism about people.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
it's a tough world, politics. It's not, they say all is fair in love and war politics, but it isn't fair. All is unfair in politics. You can say lies, you can cheat, you can be devious, whatever it is to win is considered fair. And that, to me, is not your highest and best self.
Right.
If, if we were moral and ethical in everything we do, we would have a better world and better government. So
Ah.
that's kind of that was becoming a challenge for me. So I had to get into other things, do other things.
Well, I'm glad you did. Otherwise, you wouldn't
Yeah,
be
but
here.
it was a great experience. I learned a lot. Holy cow, you learn so
Yeah,
much. It's unreal.
that's
And
amazing.
met so many people and certainly got out of my shell. I would never be doing an interview like this 5 years ago. I
Well,
would be hiding under the table.
oh, well. Like I said, I'm really glad you did.
Mhm.
All right, well, I've got to close up because
Okay.
our time is running out and I don't have the updated version, upgraded version of Zoom. So I would just like to
Okay.
have you quick plug your book.
Can you
Quick
see the
plug.
book? Is it
Yes.
backwards or
Nope,
frontwards? Okay.
it's frontwards.
Okay.
Angels
Angels,
Eat.
ETs, Miracles and Messages. It's a collection of stories from my life meant to inspire, encourage other people to look at their stories and share them.
And it
Okay.
is
And it's
available
available
at
on
John.
Amazon.
Yes.
It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and in your store.
Uh-huh. Very
Yeah.
true.
So
And
come and get
also
it at her
through
store.
you too, right?
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Well,
thank
it
you,
was
Shannon. I
absolutely. It
appreciate
was
it.
good to talk to you.
Okay.
See you later.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.